you're saying even though these folks are getting 25, 30,000 steps a day, something else is making their net metabolism not crank like we would expect.
I don't know a lot of people who would argue very forcefully that the additive model of energy expenditure just works across the board. We just have too many pieces of evidence in very different populations for people to say there is no such thing as exercise energy compensation.
The constrained energy expenditure model, I just helped. There's a YouTube channel called In a Nutshell. That's got a German word before it I can't pronounce, Kyrgyzstan or something.
Perfect. Beautiful.
Insert politically incorrect joke at the expense of German people here. I helped them out with a video on that touched on why you can't usually just exercise your way into infinite fat loss and weight loss. And the entire time that I was consulting them, I had two ideas. Like, one, I'm really happy to help. And two, I'm not the best guy to go to for this, but you are the best guy to go to for this. One of them, in any case. Tell me what we used to think about energy balance, and thus what we implied about why modern societies have such high levels of obesity. I can caricature my own view really quickly, and you let me know if it's okay.
Sure.
We thought that modern obesity largely arose from two factors. People are overeating and are substantially less active than we were in our ancestral environment. That seems to pass like almost like some kind of deep vibe check, like, of course it's both of those things. But aha, is that really the case? And what is the constrained energy expenditure model?
Yeah. You know, I think a lot of people, like you're alluding to, kind of oversimplified. Like, if people just moved more, then they would burn the type of calories we used to burn in our evolutionary history, and then we'd all be lean and happy. And if
we were in history.
Yeah, if we just avoided, you know, like the ultra processed foods and just moved more and things like that. And so that really underpins the concept of the additive model of energy expenditure, which is pretty simple. It's my normal, you know, day-to-day energy expenditure is pretty flat. And if I decide that I'm going to do an extra 100 calories per day of exercise, then my total daily energy expenditure is going to go up by 100 calories per day. And that's simple. And simple things are nice. Yeah. But simple things aren't always how it goes in reality. Yeah. And the constrained energy expenditure model comes from a series of observations indicating that when people try to increase their energy expenditure by 100 calories per day, their actual total daily energy expenditure goes up by typically less than that. You know,
how much less, if you can give us a vibe check on that?
Sure. On average, only 70% of what we'd expect. So a 30% compensation.
Was that terrible?
No,
right?
No.
But, and we'll get to this later. Actually, fuck it. Let's just get to it now. As you crank up to 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 800 extra calories, that's not 30% anymore. That changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a nonlinear effect. The more that you push, the more compensation that occurs. And huge factor, your energy status matters a lot. This is where the more recent research has kind of led us. But if we look at folks who are going to do more exercise and just adequately replace all those calories with their dietary intake, they probably won't compensate that much at all, as long as they're not doing crazy amounts of cardio. But if you are trying to induce an energy deficit and you succeed from doing extra cardio, there will be substantially more compensation. And that's why these longitudinal studies where they say, hey, we're going to have you do this much cardio per day and you're going to get super lean and we're all going to be happy. You can crunch the numbers and people end up losing sometimes half of the weight we would predict mathematically, sometimes less than half because of this compensation.
So it happens, but it's incrementally more underwhelming the more you try to push exercise as the modality by which we're going to generate a deficit.
Right.
Who is Herman Pontzer? What did he do in his research? And what is Pontzer's paradox?
I don't even know what Pontzer's paradox is, to be honest.
It's a clever name the internet came up with for what he found.
Oh, okay. Sure.
It's nice, though. It's alliteration.
Yeah. I know Herman. I see him every day. Yeah, Herman's my boss.
You got to tell him, like, hey, you know you have a paradox, right? You got to look that up.
Yeah, I wonder if he knows that. Probably. But yeah, so I work in Herman Pontzer's lab.
Oh, holy crap. All right. You're the guy to ask.
Did you not know that?
I knew that.
Okay.
I suspected it
great
highly.
actor.
I've
Yeah.
heard the rumor mill.
Yeah. So I work in Herman Ponzer's lab doing research there. And he, he's an evolutionary anthropologist. He's not an exercise scientist.
Right.
So I'm the outsider there when we do our seminars on Fridays. Sometimes it's about lemur ankles, and sometimes it's about species of hominids that haven't existed for tens of thousands of years.
That's way cooler than what we do.
Oh, it's great. I love it. It's really, really cool. But I'm like the weird guy who studies like modern day humans who move around.
You're like, let's get back to treadmills.
Yeah.
No.
But, Herman has done a lot of work in populations with low levels of industrialization, so more subsistence-oriented economies, things like hunter-gatherer communities, pastoralists who basically they take care of their herds, they do some small-scale farming.
Horticulture versus agriculture.
Exactly, yeah. And so within these populations, it's not at all unusual to see folks, depending on their role in the community, averaging 25, 30,000 steps a day. Right? Now, if you tell a person who works a desk job and has like a family, hey, I want you to get 9,000 steps a day, they're like, I'll try, like maybe, right? So, I mean, it's not unusual at all to see those types of step counts. So intuitively, doing research over there with doubly labeled water, accelerometry, people would think, we're going to clock their steps at 30,000 a day, depending on their role in the community. And we're going to see really high energy expenditures, which is why in these populations, people tend to be quite lean. They tend to have extremely low rates of, cardiometabolic disease, metabolic syndrome, things like that. And at the end of the day, they were finding really high step counts, really lean people who don't get, heart disease, diabetes, all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, energy expenditures were not off the charts like they expected. They were actually pretty typical for when compared to other fairly sedentary populations.
Adjusted for body mass.
Adjusted for body mass, absolutely.
And discovered via doubly labeled water.
Correct.
Which has criticisms methodologically, but really is a pretty fine-tuned way of going at it.
It's really good. Yeah, I mean, no method's going to be perfect, but if you want total daily energy expenditure from a human being doing what they normally do, it's your first, second, and third best option.
Yeah. Right. And so this is one hell of a trip, because earlier you essentially said that something like 90 or 85% of the adaptations for metabolism are in NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And now we're saying, even accounting for step count, which is probably in the real world for most of us who can't just have a doubly labeled water drink every time we want, the best way to try to account for that sort of NEAT, step count wise, you're saying even though these folks are getting 25, 30,000 steps a day, something else is making their net metabolism not crank like we would expect.
Mm-hmm.
And the data is, in your estimate, I'll give you three options and you can just kibosh all of them and just go from there. Curious and speculative, relatively well supported, but with some unanswered questions quite large, or starting to accumulate to the point of like, this is really what's happening and we just have to deal with it. Where are we closest to on that?
Between B and C.
Snap.
Okay. I don't know a lot of people who would argue very forcefully that the additive model of energy expenditure just works across the board. We just have too many pieces of evidence in very different populations for people to say there is no such thing as exercise energy compensation. But there are still massive questions about what elements of energy expenditure are actually adapting. I have a pet theory, and I want to be clear that I'm going out on a limb, and I don't represent any of the smart people I work with when I say stupid things on podcasts.
Okay, so this is an official statement from Ponzer's lab. Got it.
Yeah. I got into studying energy expenditure because I thought metabolic adaptation was fascinating. When I first heard about exercise energy compensation, I thought it was a totally distinct thing that was also interesting. I am now starting to see the Venn diagram as overlapping far more considerably than I used to. And I think when we talk about reductions in NEAT, there are two ways we can look at that. One is kind of the behavioral, whether it's volitional or non-volitional, just doing less stuff, right? And so much of that, but not all of that, will show up in a step count, right? But also, there is some very interesting evidence from metabolic adaptation world indicating that when people are, adapting metabolically to a lack of energy, which again, we see more exercise energy compensation in an energy deficit.
Yes.
There's some clear parallels there. We see that it's not necessarily just that they're taking fewer steps, but also that steps cost less.
You get more efficient.
More efficient. And what's really fascinating, there's some cool studies by Rosenbaum's group at Columbia, 15, 20, 25 years ago, where they looked at the metabolic efficiency of folks who were doing different exercise intensities after a 10% body weight reduction. And what they found was people were burning way fewer calories per unit of exercise, but specifically at low intensities. And they were, for some reason, not utilizing carbohydrate the way they typically would. There was a big shift toward utilizing more fat as fuel. And what was really interesting about that was they still had the capability to burn carbohydrate. Like, it's not that, it's like with ketogenic diets, when people adapt to it, if you do glycogen loading and then say, great, go do a long race, they can't even use the carbohydrate that you just gave them. They don't have the enzymatic metabolic machinery to utilize it.
They just cramp faster.
Exactly, yeah. With these folks, they still retained the ability to actually do that substrate switching, but there was just some preference being driven toward utilizing fat, doing it more efficiently, and literally burning fewer calories per pedal stroke on the bike at low intensities. And the reason that's really cool is because when you're talking about the energy cost specifically of low intensity activities, it really helps you understand how, like, oh, so we could actually measure you getting those 25,000 low intensity steps a day. And we would think, oh yeah, NEAT should be totally unchanged.
A step is a step is a step.
But when you talk about a small increase in efficiency and then you multiply it by 30,000, you get a number that's a lot bigger than it was before you multiplied it by 30,000. So it's a really fascinating thing that I think we're starting to fill in some of these gaps. We need a lot more research, but absolutely. I think a lot of folks would say the energy expenditure in these different, whether we're talking about elite endurance athletes, we're talking about hunter-gatherer communities, compensation's happening. The arguments are about to what extent, in what context, and what is the actual component of energy expenditure that's changing.
That makes amazing sense. So this model isn't saying or proposing that physical activity doesn't matter at all, because I've seen unfortunate misinterpretations of this, like, just doesn't matter, bro, exercise doesn't do anything, and because it's clearly false. So what is it saying? Can you give us a pithy take on how we can say, okay, maybe I can't exercise my way to whatever low body weight that I want, but at a certain level of exercise, doing much more is just some combination of impractical, inefficient, and uncomfortable, and I should maybe shoot for like a moderate high level of activity pegged during my diet and not try to go to high, super high? What's your take on how to properly interpret this?
Yeah, so I've had people who ask me, like, oh, you work with Herman, right? I say, yes. So you mean to tell me that an Olympic endurance athlete burns the same number of calories per day than, me behind my desk?
Yep, to the man, every person.
Of course not. That's right. Ridiculous, right? So I think the easiest kind of take home point from the application of this model is exercise is an incredible thing. It's one of the best things you can do for your body, right? If you want to maintain proper health, both physical and mental, exercising is a good thing.
Huge new research on the mental benefits all the time.
Absolutely. Also, exercise in some cases can actually help you regulate your appetite better.
Yes.
Some people notice that when they are extremely sedentary and then they go to being moderately active, they reduce their calorie intake and they engage in less hedonic eating. Eating gets more closely coupled to their actual physiological energy needs rather than just the hedonic reward of something that tastes good.
Yes, I've noticed that with sleep loss as well. If you're lacking in sleep, man, Cheetos look real good. If you're well slept, you're like, I kind of want broccoli.
Oh, there's clear evidence on that. Yeah, sleep restriction completely throws appetite regulation out of whack.
I love it.
And exercise also impacts sleep. Like people who exercise sleep better.
Yes. Yeah. I was actually just on a podcast The Diary of a CEO podcast. I can neither legibly write in a diary nor am I a CEO. I don't know. I was on there, but Stephen did mention, he was like, well, so if people are exercising, doesn't that increase their appetite and just kibosh the whole thing? And I was like, actually, no. The relationship, as far as I understand it, please correct me, for the average person, if you marginally increase their physical activity, there's not a predictable effect on increasing their appetite in a way that you're like, yep, you're going to want to eat more food. And for some people, there's less, some a little more, but on average, it's kind of no one showed up to the party sort of effect. What do you think about that?
Yeah, the effect seems to be nonlinear. That's come up a lot today, which is frustrating. We like linear things because they're easier to interpret.
Yeses and no's, man.
More is either better or worse. Yeah. So what we find is going from very sedentary to moderately active actually tends to improve appetite regulation.
Amazing.
But then for most people, not for all.
Always averages, always exceptions.
But then when you start to go from like moderate to super active, we see that because you've recoupled your appetite to your actual energy needs, then it just kind of goes right up linearly, as you know, because you need to replace those calories.
Yes.
Right. So it's this really interesting kind of nonlinear pattern. But yeah, when most people are like, well, I should exercise more for my health, but I don't want to have an increased appetite and then gain more weight. It's like, don't worry about that at all. But the take home from our current understanding of, the constrained energy expenditure model is that exercise is fantastic for your health. It's a very important thing to do, but it is an extremely inefficient tool for weight loss. And what we tend to find, in the context of weight loss and like general population, is that in most cases, your approach to weight loss ought to involve some amount of exercise just because exercise is good in general. Like you should be it doesn't matter if you're trying to lose weight or not. Our kind of default assumption is if you want to be a human who feels your best, you should be exercising.
Flat out. Or just at least.
If you can.
Yeah, and just to be super clear, it's not just exercise. Exercise is a willful, meaningful thing you take time, definitionally, out of your day to do for the ostensible purpose of increasing your health or modifying other behaviors. Physical activity.
Right.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
And exercise is usually what we end up having to do because everyone sits at a desk and you can't exactly push the desk around.
Yeah. So our understanding is that for optimal human health, having at least a moderate level of physical activity is really critical. But when it comes to actually inducing weight loss, the decision to just add more exercise to accomplish that is usually extremely inefficient. And the more extreme you go with it, the more inefficient it becomes, which is super frustrating. So we view exercise as a health tool, or I do. I view exercise as a health tool, and I view diet as a weight loss tool. And I try to keep those somewhat distinct.
There is no avoiding hard training if you want to grow. But if you want to grow the most, your training needs to be hard and smart. RP Hypertrophy app will make sure you're progressing on track, monitoring and adjusting your workout at all times. So for all that work you're doing, you can be sure you're getting the best results. The way I tend to think about it is exercise will help set like on your burner on the stove. If you set it to simmer, that really helps. You don't want to turn it off.
Right.
But if you go to super high, you just get into more problems than solutions at that point. So even for weight loss, a moderate, or what I would describe as step count wise, only in reference to averages in America, moderate to moderate high.
Yeah.
8, 10, 12,000 steps a day. Rock on, man. Everyone who's trying to lose weight should be targeting something like that numbers. But if someone's like, what if I can do 20,000? Like, dope. If that's your vibe, amazing. But it's not going to be like, oh, but can I also eat way more calories? Like, that's not going to pan out for you more than likely. Is that a decent take?
I completely agree. Yeah, I have noticed as someone who has gone from like really active to really sedentary at different times in my life, I do find weight loss to be more manageable, easier, and more enjoyable when I do have, like you said, at least a moderate to moderate high level of activity. I do think it has a pretty big impact more on the appetite side than anything else. But yeah, I think it's really important from my perspective to get people out of the idea that exercise is a tool you leverage to increase total daily expenditure to induce weight loss. I think that is not the best way, not the most constructive way to view it. I think viewing it as a supplementary thing that can make weight loss more manageable, more tolerable, and is also just good for you, I think that's kind of the better way to contextualize. And when I say exercise, again, I'm talking about general physical activity.
Yes.
You know, so general physical activity, critical for health. For people that we're usually interacting with, resistance training, critical for the kind of physique you're trying to accomplish.
Sure.
And then diet, ultimately, the critical thing for inducing fat loss.
So you want to be healthy and well and lean and strong. Exercise and high levels of physical activity, moderate high, sort of non-negotiables in the modern landscape. But if you want to meaningfully lose lots of weight, you gotta look at the diet side to crank that.
Yeah.
Seemingly passes the vibe check for you.
Yeah.
What's an example how not understanding this idea can lead people who want to be leaner or lose weight down a suboptimal path, where if you could go back in time and just to be like, don't do this, do this other thing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, I actually think it's not like I have to dig for some kind of random. I think this is most people in the general population, their interaction with weight loss attempts. Like when you talk to someone and they say, I'm going to try to lose weight. And you say, oh, cool. Are you going to reduce your caloric intake? Try to quantify it and then make a reduction, or make some kind of, qualitative change to your diet that's going to induce a calorie deficit.
Less junk food, something.
Right. Yeah. Usually people say, no, I'm going to start jogging. Right. And you're just like, and I never discourage that, because I always, great. You're taking active steps to, exercise more autonomy over your health and
that
well-being.
will help a little bit. Absolutely. With weight loss.
Yeah. And it'll be good for many reasons. Right. But I do think that there's just this, this really huge misunderstanding, and it leads a lot of people to the situation where when they decide that they're going to engage in weight loss and really try to build some self-efficacy and autonomy about managing their own health and body mass and body weight, people start out by putting themselves directly in hard mode. And it's like, well, we could have made this tiny dietary adjustment to induce that level of weight loss, and then done maybe a little bit of extra walking, get an extra 2,000 steps a day. But instead you went right to, I'm going to train for a half marathon or a 10K or whatever. And you are kind of taking out the hardest parts that are more likely to cause you like physical pain when you just get started, right?
Taking an inordinate amount of time.
A lot of time. You have to restructure your schedule, and it's the exercise, and then I got to find a time to shower before work, or I got to do this after work, and how am I going to get dinner for the kids? And it
We're
really
gonna run
is
to get dinner together as a family.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you really are kind of putting it right into hard mode, where if our only goal was to just like lose, a few pounds over the next couple months, like we could have made some really small tweaks to your diet that literally made no impact on your daily schedule, minimal impact on the bulk of your diet. It could have just been a really small swap. And the result of that is people, when they jump right to hard mode, they start to get the impression, this is not for me.
Yes.
I can't do this, because when I was doing all this hard stuff that dramatically altered my day and made my knees and hips and low back feel like crap, I still didn't even make that much progress.
Yeah.
And that can be really deflating, and it can take a lot of folks, really, it can cause them to completely disconnect from even the ambition of saying, yeah, I'm really gonna, build some self-efficacy and take my health into my own hands.
The way I've seen this play out, unfortunately, in many instances, it becomes almost like a demographic identity thing, where people are like, exercise and weight loss, that's for those other folks over there. I'm not one of those folks. I tried the shit. It does not fit. And you're like,
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's, I was really surprised by some of the fitness reactions when, the GLP-1 drugs, that research has been going on for actually a pretty long time.
20 years.
But the fitness world just started reacting to it within the last couple years, right? And I was really surprised that at first a lot of folks were like, but wait a minute, if people can get support for weight loss through a pharmacological intervention, what am I going to do as a fitness professional? And some people were feeling like, no, these drugs are going to like replace fitness professionals and we're screwed. And I was like, you are not just wrong, you're the opposite of right.
Yes.
I
feel like you're quoting me. I say that all the time.
I was like, you're so far off base that you are all the way on the other side.
You're not randomly wrong.
Yeah.
You're orthogonally wrong.
Yeah. So I was like, there are so many people who detach fully from fitness endeavors because they've had so many bad experiences. if we can give them something at the beginning that makes exercise less painful, if we can give them something that starts to build that self-efficacy and have them shift that identity and say, actually, I am the type of person who engages in exercise. I feel like I belong in these spaces, and I feel better, like my body hurts less when I do these things, and I have this momentum going. I was like, dude, you are going to have, if these drugs take off and they work the way we think they're going to work, and so far all signs point to pretty good, we are taking the potential fitness world from this big to this big, right? And it stunned me that that wasn't their first impression of it.
Oh my God. And you and I could talk about this for another 50 hours. Agreed, mega agreed.